a discussion about the Air Force's massive mobility war game in the Pacific. Today, July 24th, 2023. Good morning, early birds. I'm Jonathan Lerfeld, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. Today, I spoke with senior Air Force Times reporter Rachel Cohen about her recent trip to Guam for the Mobility Guardian 23 exercise and what the training means for the Air Force's ability to mount a response against threats in the Pacific. Rachel, thank you for joining me again on the pod. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing great. Can you tell me and listeners a little bit about your recent trip to Guam and a little bit about the exercise Air Mobility Guardian that you got to learn and watch?
So I was in Guam July 8th through the 13th. Mobility Guardian is a giant, 3,000 person, 70-ish aircraft effort to basically see, how quickly the Air Force can rush, its cargo planes and its tankers out to the Pacific to, deter things if they start to go south, either China invading Taiwan or, North Korea deciding to be aggressive, anything like that. They want to see, just how quickly can we get there. I embedded with the 437th Airlift Wing out of Charleston, and they let me tag along for a couple weeks, and it was great.
How was your flight from?
It was so long. It was so long. So we went from Charleston to Hickam, which is about 10 hours. And then we got stuck there for a little bit just with scheduling delays and things like that. So we went to Hickam, or we went from Hickam to Guam, which I think was another 7 hours, and it's a 14-hour time difference. So we were flying for a long time.
Yeah. So give listeners a bit of an idea of the scale of this exercise. How many countries were involved? How many participants do we think were there? Something along those lines.
Yeah, so it's the Five Eyes countries, so the intelligence sharing coalition that is the U.S., United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and then France and Japan were also there. So they said it's around 3,000 people. Most of those are Americans, but it's a good chunk from the other countries.
Some of the goals of the exercise seem to be preparing for potential war in the Pacific. What are some of the questions that the Air Force and some of these other countries are asking themselves about why they need to prepare for something like this?
Yeah, so I think more than specifically preparing for a war, it's kind of flexing some muscles that the U.S. hasn't had to in a while. After 20 years of war in U.S. Central Command, there's a lot of bases there that are kind of the lily pads, right? Very long-standing, well-established bases where people, can get resources and sleep, and they're a base like you would see in the U.S. So for the Pacific, there's a few goals for the exercise. One is, like I said, how quickly can we get out there without having those resources of that kind of network of bases? The second goal being, how well can the United States integrate with the other countries' militaries? Not everybody is in the same communication channels, just in terms of, some people use Signal, some people use WhatsApp, some people use Mattermost. So how do you communicate across countries? How do you get everybody in the same flight schedule when not everybody has those same systems? How do you take an American airman and put them on an Australian plane and make sure that they can do the same mission? And then another goal is, how do we, once everybody is out in the Pacific, how do we get them back, right? Like, so people aren't just stranded on an island somewhere.
I would imagine that the water part of it makes it a little bit more challenging compared to, the internal land element of being somewhere like the Middle East.
Right. Yeah. A lot of it is water. A lot of it is just the distances are enormous. I mean, it's 8,000-ish miles from Charleston, where we started, to Guam. And, half of that is over the Pacific Ocean. Part of it is also, really just the infrastructure is not there in the Pacific in the same way that it is in Europe or in the Middle East. You've got runways that either aren't real runways, they're kind of just dirt strips, which a lot of planes can't land on. They don't have lights, they don't have, just the regular airbase infrastructure that you would see somewhere like Ramstein or Al-Udeid or things like that. So it requires a little different resources, a little different thinking, interactions with countries just to make sure that the U.S. can come in, airfield hours, customs, all of the kind of bureaucratic nitty-gritty that you have to work through in real time when you're trying to get somewhere.
Are there other things from the global war on terror, actions in Iraq, Afghanistan, things like that from the past few years, decades, that are being taken and applied to strategy for an exercise like this?
You can look at, obviously we've been partnering with these other countries for a long, long time. It's not our first go around working with them. So, you're building off of those established relationships. I think really with Operation Allies Refuge, which was, the evacuation out of Afghanistan, that was a lot of the same, how do we do this really fast in really large quantities of airlift? What sort of, authorities do regular airmen or kind of lower level commanders, what do they need to just be able to move out and get stuff done without, waiting hours, to go up the chain and say like, hey, can I do X, Y, and Z? So things like that, I think there's a lot that they don't want to do like they did in the Middle East. They don't want to rely on kind of those pre-positioned stocks of stuff that were there for years and years. I mean, there's a lot of people that think they got kind of lazy. So they're trying to fix that now.
So I want to talk about China for a second. How, if at all, has the country reacted to this exercise?
So I don't know, how direct, like a 1-for-1 reaction it is, but China's been involved in really large-scale military exercises off its east coast for multiple months now. Those have kind of ramped up, in terms of aircraft that are kind of inching closer to Taiwan than they typically go. Ships that are sailing, in areas, in mass that they, don't. Normally there's definitely, China's saying, oh, you can be here, we can be here too, right? They just began another exercise with Russia, so that's obviously a military alliance that the U.S. keeps a very close eye on.
How has Taiwan played a role in escalating any other tension in the region with China and the relationship with this exercise?
I think Taiwan is always kind of the undercurrent. When the U.S. says, China is the pacing threat for the U.S. military, a lot of that has to do with tech and the size of their forces and things like that. But, when it comes to why do we need to be in the Pacific, a lot of that has to do with, if China starts lashing out at Taiwan in a way that the U.S. feels compelled to react to. So I wouldn't say that Taiwan is not involved in Mobility Guardian. There's not a direct connection to the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, but it's definitely part of the tone.
What surprised you most about the trip?
At least from my perspective and from talking to people who were there, for a couple weeks, it seemed to be going relatively well, just in terms of, there's a lot of kind of hurdles to get past and kinks to work through, but, they were having, a fair amount of success at, having a coalition planning cell instead of a, kind of U.S. centric. They were putting, Australian airmen in positions to plan things for the whole coalition. They were, putting everybody from every country in the room so that everybody had a say and people could kind of play off of each other and learn from each other. That was really neat to see. And that is not, typically how it goes at a scale like that. It was neat to see cargo aircraft, with multiple languages on them, kind of down the runway as far as the eye could see.
Right.
Somebody made the remark that like, oh, the aircraft that are here, there were a couple dozen in Guam at Anderson. This is larger than a lot of the world's air forces. So, and their efforts to come in without relying on the Army, have one of their contingency response groups, kind of open fake sort of airfield there with trailers and things like that. And hand it off in the space of a week. They were trying to move really fast, and there's some problems that they ran into, but for the most part, it seemed like it was working.
And this exercise will happen again in the coming
2 years. It's every 2 years. So this was the first time that they did it outside of the continental U.S. to, like I said, use some muscles that they hadn't before.
Right.
So, I don't know if they're planning to keep it overseas for the next time, but I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned on, how do you do it at scale, and how do you do it places that you do have to ask for permission to land. You don't have to do that in the U.S.
Beyond this exercise, do you see yourself going back to Guam at any point in the near future?
I would love to return to Guam anytime Guam will have me. It's a really long ride. Obviously, the military is building up there. You can drive down the road and see Army barracks being built. The Marines are expanding there. The Air Force, is recovering from the recent typhoon there, but there's lots of plans to kind of keep building up Guam as a strategic position in the Pacific. So, don't know if it's my first and last trip there, but there's certainly going to be more stuff to go see.
That's it for us this morning. To get more of the top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media @defense_news and @Military Times. The Early Bird Brief is hosted by me, Jonathan Lehrfeld, and produced by Zamone Z. Perez. If you liked our conversation today, be sure to check out Rachel's work at airforcetimes.com. Also, please rate us and leave a comment on whatever platform you use. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Bruce. Have a great day.